All right, Steve Wood, recovered alcoholic. Welcome to the Great Reality Book Study. Um, you know, to we're getting to the tail end of this book study, I wanted to let people know that we'll probably be wrapping up sometime next month. And the first of the year, I'm going to partner up with Lavelle, and we're going to do this together with a new name, same time and everything. So I want to let everybody know about that. So we're looking at step 12. We'll spend a few weeks here. And there's an old proverb when I think of 12 that comes to mind, the stuff I've learned, and many things I like to do, they mention this little proverb. If you want happiness for an hour, take a nap. If you want happiness for a day, go fishing. If you want happiness for a year, inherit a fortune. If you want happiness for a lifetime, help someone. And that is, to me, just the aspect of, if you want happiness, help a person. And I never knew happiness would be found in that. Um, I remember it's probably about 17 years ago or something like that. A guy asked me a very powerful question. Actually, a woman asked me a very powerful question. She says, "What do you do to get noticed by God?" And it made me think for a second, because I wanted to be profound what I said, and I just realized it's a simple answer. And that's bring the message with love and compassion to those who were once as lost as I was. Carry the message. Just there's no greater love that we can give. Um, the journey through the steps is simply a journey into becoming an altruistic being, and then growing in that altruism. Um, for instance, let's just look at the third step prayer on 63. It says, "God, I offer myself to thee, to do with me as thou wilt. Relieve me into bondage of self, that I may better do thy will. Take away my difficulties, and here's why. Why do I want that victory over them, over the difficulties, may bear witness to those I would help of thy power, thy love, and thy may a wife might do thy will always." So it's telling me that victory over my difficulties, I'll bear witness to those I'd help of thy power, thy love, and thy way. I mean, bear witness to a lot of things. With victory over my difficulties, I'll be led to those I can help. So I must find those difficulties. And of course, 4 and 5, we uncover and discover our difficulties. I mean, I saw that my resentments, my fears, my harms were the result of me being selfish. And you know the instincts play such a big role into that, but the end result is that I discovered that anger and fear was my own creation. And 4 and 5, what it did is it awakened me to how completely selfish I was. I mean, I had no interest in other people, zero, even if I thought I cared. And you tie that into a selfish person also being an addict, where we want that high, and or the alcohol. But it's not just that. It's we don't know any better. We're just selfish, and we have all these resentments. And you know, I basically was only into furthering my own interests, and I had that little or no interest in others. No concern for others' feelings, beliefs, or needs, um, their well-being. So, anyways, 4 and 5 awaken us to that, make us aware of it. Let me say that, make us aware of that. And 6, we let God remove those difficulties. And you get a 7-step prayer. Again, it says, "My Creator, I am now willing that you should have all of me, good and bad. I pray that you now remove from me every single defective character which stands in usefulness to you and my fellows. Grant me strength to go up here to your bidding, amen." So he's just like a third step prayer, that where it says victory on the third step prayer, it says remove you know the every single defective character which stands in the way of my usefulness to God and others. So his bidding is God's work. Ultimate God's work is sponsoring, taking others on this journey. So the third and 7-step prayer, tell me I needed to be of maximum service to God and the people about us. And it says that same thing it says in 77, to enable us to be maximum service to God and the people about us. I need to go out and make amends. I need to clean up that. So 4 through 9, shatter the illusion of what we thought life was and awaken us to this inner power that sets us free. And 10 and 11 help us know God and create that channel to God where I can spend time with God. And my life shifted from what's in it to me for love and service for others. And almost a little over 24 years now I've been doing this. And I would say just almost every day I wake up to how may I serve before I do my upon awakening. I always ask the first question. I never asked that question before. Um, but if you go to page 20, it makes it very clear what a new life looks like, looks like, what it looks like. And it's a simple sentence. Page 20, our very lives, towards the top of the page, our very lives as ex-problem drinkers depend upon our constant thought of others and how we may meet their needs. If I'm not overcoming my difficulties, I will not have constant thought of others, and we're dependent upon that. So when your thinking shifts from what's in it to me to how can I serve, like I mentioned, I mean, possibilities they're endless. We work on ourselves. I didn't know this. We work on ourselves to help others. I thought that if I worked on myself, it would help me. I mean, I'm sorry. Let me say that. I originally thought that if I help others, it will help me to overcome all this stuff. No, I needed to, you know, just basically help. When you help others, you know, you work on yourself so you can have the ability to help others. And then on top of that, helping others helps us. So helping others also, I mentioned a word earlier called altruism. And what altruism is, it's first of all, it's a core aspect of, I would say, hopefully every religion, and tons of spiritual philosophies and spiritual traditions. And altruism is simply the selfless, not selfish, selfless concern for the welfare of others. And a spiritual lifestyle can never be a selfish lifestyle. Otherwise, it's not a spiritual lifestyle. So altruism comes from the word called aturi, which means other people or someone else. So if selfishness is concerned mostly with my own wants and needs alone and concern for others, and altruism, the selflessness, must mean concern mostly for the needs of others with low or no interest in my own needs. It's basically the quality of being more concerned with the welfare of others rather than yourself. So it's the opposite. It's about being morally obligated to the benefit of the person. And when you do that, you start to give freely of yourself without comprehension of anything in return. Because when we awaken and we see how selfish we were, we don't want, I mean, I was a counselor for quite a while, and then they started having me do big book studies there. And I went to the head of the rehab and I just said, I can't do big book studies and get paid for it. Because I've been doing this, with that. And the guy goes, really? And he was shocked. He didn't get it. Because I was doing book studies and sponsoring without comprehension of anything in return. I'm not doing it for anything in return. As far as the only thing I want in return is what I receive from doing it, but not money or like that. But so when you reach that point, when I did, I realized it wasn't about me anymore. It was about others centered. Um, and when you're living the altruistic life, we're living life in its truest form. It's the ultimate expression of love, generosity, and kindness. And you're living your ideals. We talked about those a few weeks back. Then those ideals are inside you, and you follow those ideals. And what happens is you discover the purpose of life is to be helpful, generous, and compassionate, to make a difference, to go out and make a difference in the life of another person. And once you see that you can do that, how do you see that though? Because someone helped you. And you're like, I remember I had a sponsor and I was like, hey man, let's go hang out. And he's like, I'm working with someone else tomorrow. And I go, this is all you do? And he goes, yeah. And and I realized then, when you give to the powerless, to the weak, to the helpless, to the lost, to the desperate, right? I realized I wasn't a prisoner of my own thoughts, even my physical pain that I went through. I would go to hear a fifth step and horrendous back pain, and I'm sitting there hearing it, and I'm not thinking about it anymore. I just know that, my experience is that we're hardwired to be altruistic. It's in our program. Yet people will say to me is one of the most ludicrous things you hear in the fellowship that this is a selfish program. And they say, "Oh, well, we're taking care of ourselves first." You know, it's interesting because we made a decision to turn our lives over to the care of God. And the way I looked at it is God first, others second, and my needs get met. You know, and that's the thing, and is selfishness is the root of our troubles. We must get rid of selfishness, practice selfless, at every opportunity. Because the spiritual life, it has to be built on the foundation of helping others and not about living your life for yourself anymore. Because selfishness used to be the foundation of our lives. When I just know when I was selfish, and I'm not saying I'm not selfish sometimes, but I have a way out when it happens. But when the world gets really small really quick when we're selfish. And when you shift to making others the folk of your life, the world becomes what broad and endless and roomy and everything. So in a whole new world, where we get to witness miracle after miracle after miracle. So our goal is to eradicate selfishness from our lives. And it takes awareness of our own self-centered, egotistical greed to know what altruism is. And we do that by 4 through 9. And we know that the meaning of life today is devoting ourselves to others. And rather than looking down on them, we put our hand out and lift them up. It's the only time we should look down on a person, or pick them apart. We pick them up, bandage their wounds, and, stick to them until they have the power, can help them. That's what we do. The question is are we, getting something we've never had when we're selfless? When we're selfless, are we getting something we never had? Or is it just, are we regaining something that we lost along the way? It's something that's not, we've always had, unselfishness to altruism. Just like God, the Spirit's always been inside of us ever since we were born. So one of the extremely, one of the most important, aspects of being altruistic is staying in 10 and 11. Staying in 10 and 11. And step 10 will always show me, hold on 1 second, I gotta turn something off my computer. Step 10 will always show me where I'm selfish in my resentments, my fears, my harm, or sex conduct. And that awareness will wipe away resentment, help me face fear, make amends when I say something stupid, creates that clear channel to God so I can meditate and come out and play with you guys, and I can pray for others in there. This whole book teaches us how to pray for others in that clear channel so I can focus on helping others 24/7. That's why 10/11 is so important. I'm going to show you guys something really cool. And I call this 10, 11, 12 the 3 steps of spiritual progress. I'm going to show you exactly what I'm talking about here. So, now all these presentations I do up on the board here, on the board, I say the board, that I'm used to doing these in person, are stuff I used to do in person. I used to actually bring up this is a 3-legged stool. I used to actually have a real 3-legged stool that I would show. And so if you look at like this, if I take a leg out from the stool, it falls over. So let's look at what from this standpoint, 10, 11, 12, right? What happens if I take out step 10? It falls over. What if I don't do step 11? It falls. What if I don't do 10 and 11? If I don't do all 3, it's laying on the ground. And so many people don't do 10 when they should, and they wonder why the recovery is not sturdy. If I don't sponsor, it falls over. If I'm not doing any of this stuff, it falls over. The program's incomplete. And when I have a sponsee or a friend, I'm straightforward with people. And you know, and a lot of those people will say, I don't sponsor, I'm too busy, or they haven't sponsored in a long time, or they don't do 10 anymore. And I ask them, they'll call themselves a book person. I say, when did you stop doing the steps? And they give this reaction like, what do you mean? I'm doing the steps. I'm just not doing 11. It's all three together. And if you want everything this program can give you, make your stool stand on those three legs. Because what happens when it is complete is wholeness. Wholeness. And that's where I'm complete. So it's a very powerful thing. I love actually having the real stool, because you have someone come up and pull one of the legs out and it falls over. It's really cool to do it in person. But it's a very cool thing. Let's go to the bottom of page 132. There's one sentence here that is perfect lead in to where we're at in this book study. And it just tells us, first of all, it says we have recovered, which means I got a hold of this. I don't have the obsession anymore. And we've been given the power to help others. So being recovered, we have the power to help others. Maybe that is the power we've always had or been searching for. I mentioned a minute ago. And so far, you know, we've covered two of the three steps of the 3 steps of spiritual progress, 10, 11, 12. So now we're looking at 12. And this is I'm going to read out of what Bill wrote in 1961, and it's what came to his mind. It was a number of years later in 61 he wrote this, but I like just the way it sounds. It's really good. And I think it's just from a letter he wrote. It says, in the wake of my spiritual experience, there came a vision of a society of alcoholics. If each sufferer were to carry the news of the hopelessness of alcoholism, that's allergy obsession, to each new prospect, a chain reaction can be set in motion, forming an ever-growing fellowship of alcoholics whose mission it would be, I love this, to visit the caves of still suffering and set them free. It's amazing to go to those caves. As each dedicated himself to carry this message to still another, and those released to still others, such a society could pyramid to tremendous proportions, each transmitting his experience to the next chain style. I love that too. It could reach every single alcoholic in the world capable of being honest enough to admit his own defeat. You know, this is powerful. I love the chain style in there. I love the visiting the still caves, and I don't do much wet calls anymore. That's when you go to someone's house, because I've been had my life flashing from my face a couple times. That guy pulled a gun on me one time, so I don't go to people's houses anymore. Um, let me rephrase it. I will if I feel safe. But I had a guy throw a beer bottle at my head one time. He goes, "Mom, you brought the AA guys back," and this beer bottle went right over my head. And we talked. And actually, we about 2 months later, he showed up in the meeting. You never know. But I go to a lot of rehabs and detoxes and stuff. There are a lot of them. They pretty much know me, so they let me in. So, but Bill was very adamant about carrying the message, especially alcoholics, because he saw that it was bigger, and than AA. But the thing about it is when he originally wrote it, he said, um, having had a spiritual experience, the result of this course of action, we try to carry this message to others, especially alcoholics, and practice these principles in all our affairs. So he was very adamant about could be bigger, but other members of A were like, no, just keep it to alcoholics. We need this, and but I mean, look where we're at today. It's different programs everywhere. Of course, a big influence is the Oxford Group, and they had keep the conversion experience by carrying the Oxford Group message of salvation to others. And the thing about it is, in the first printing of the big book, it said, um, spiritual experience, which is a sudden, overwhelming God consciousness. And spiritual experience result of direct contact with God, character change and wholeness. Boom, 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 very fast. The problem was not everybody was having this white light experience Bill was talking about. And he started to realize, especially from the books like Variety List Experiences, that there's something called a spiritual awakening, which is a gradual shift in the God conscious. And it leads to the same dimension, just a slower pace, and character change and wholeness. And when the second printing of the big book was written, I'm going to put it up on the screen because we've read this 100 times, but it's good to see it too. I heard it 1,000 times at meeting. Is having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to others. We try to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all our affairs. Of course, I've read it 100 times and I'm still stumbling over it. One thing I recognize about step 12, if you really break it down and fine tune it a little bit, you can see all three of the three of spiritual progress within this step. I mean, they're telling us that we've had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, right? At some point of 4 through 9, we had a spiritual awakening and we discover power. And when I think of that, okay, we're at 12, we must keep that relationship with that power, because I think of step 11. The second part of 12, we try to carry this message, the message is simple. As a result of steps 4 through 9, you will find the power that will solve your drink problem. Another way to put it is, I had a spiritual awakening, so can you. That's the simplest aspect for a newcomer. And the third part is practice these principles in all our affairs. And practice means to do something over and over again. There's another word for practice we mentioned earlier, continue. So I think of continue, and we see in step 10, continue to do steps 4 through 9 in all my affairs, all areas of my life. When something comes up, so it's step 10. So I see that in there. So there's a lot of, if you look at it that way, it's all there. It's all there. I'm going to turn this down. There we go. Hold on a second. So if you have a 12 and 12, if you don't know, big deal. I'm going to read a little bit out of it, page 109 of the 12 and 12. 109. I'll give you guys a second to get there. All right, 109. Now, what about the rest of the 12 steps? The wonderful energy it releases, and the eager action by which it carries our message to the next suffering alcoholic, which finally translates the 12 steps into action upon all our affairs. It is the payoff, the magnificent reality of Alcoholics Anonymous. One reason I'm going to say this is, you will not fully understand the steps until you take someone else through it. And it's kind of like the teaching aspect. If like Paul was a history teacher and it's his first year teaching, and we come to his we meet up with him and he says, so what did you learn in history this year? And we're teaching it so far. He'll break out a book and he'll start reading out of the book and tell us what he's been studying. But we go talk to him in 2 years or 3 years, and hey, so what do you learn in history? He's not gonna open no book. He's just gonna know it. The more we do this, the more we know it. And we know when we do 4 and 5, the fourth time, the first time, it's not meant for us to understand what we're doing. Just do them, and then the awakening happens. And I start doing 10, I start doing 11, and I take someone through this. I start knowing it more. Between me doing my own inventory in 10 and me hearing someone else's 5th steps. That's why it says in this book, step 5 was the answer to true kinship between man and God. It says, until we listen to complete candor of our conflicts and listen to someone else do the same, we still didn't quite belong. Back to 109 and 12 and 12. Even the newest newcomers find undreamed rewards as he tries to help his brother alcoholic. I love that. The one who is even blinder than he is. This is, and indeed, the kind of giving that actually demands nothing. He does not expect his brother sufferer to pay him or even to love him. And then he discovers by the divine paradox of this kind of giving, he has found his own reward, whether his brother has yet received anything or not. I love that. His own character still may be gravely defective, but he somehow knows that God has enabled him to make a mighty beginning, and he senses that he stands at the edge of new mysteries, joys, and experiences which he has never dreamed. This is deep stuff there. I mean, I love that because I couldn't put it in the words that good. He just the way he says it. So I want to talk a little bit about sponsorship. And it in the Akron version of the Oxford group, they used the term sponsorship, but it wasn't what we think exactly. It's a little different. It was a new person was taken through what they called spiritual training or soul surgery, and it was taken by an experienced method member. Um, that was that. So that action was called sponsorship, and the experienced members were called the sponsor. The term sponsee was never used. And as an Oxford quote that I love is, walk with a new man until he knows he can be a life changer to another. Leave him so he can bring others back to God. But so true AA sponsorship, if you want to call it that, and you know, can be traced back to the early 50s at St. Thomas, Hospital in Akron. And it's where Dr. Bob worked. And Sister Ignacia was this, a lot of you guys probably read about her before. She's a no-nonsense Catholic nun, in charge of admissions. And I grew up around nuns and stuff like that. And I talked to Schmitty, Dr. Bob's son, and he never, I think he just heard a lot about her. And he goes, "Is everything you've experienced at nuns, experienced with her? She was no nonsense." Um, and when one thing that Schmitty says, he talked about how Bob and Sister Ignacia would it was like 2003 when I talked to him. He passed away a number of years ago, Schmitty did. But he talked about how Bob and Sister Ignacia, especially Bob, would sneak patients into that upper ward with fake ailments like acute gastritis and brain hemorrhages and stuff. So they because they're alcoholic, they want to treat alcoholics in the hospital. So once they got them in there, the only visitors patients could have was an AA member. An AA member would drop off the alcoholic at the hospital. They would come back during their, I think it was like 5 or 6 day stay, and do step work with them and accompany them to the hospital's AA meeting. And they're also responsible for picking up the person and taking them home. And that act they called sponsorship. But the term sponsor in a literature was first used in I believe it's 1938 in a pamphlet called Manual for Alcoholics Anonymous. But the big one was in 1944. Um, it was a 13-page pamphlet written by Clarence Snyder, um, and it was called Going Through the Steps. And in that, I've read it before a few times. I've read it a long time, but it talked about you know um, the gains of being a sponsor, why you should sponsor, how to approach the person, how to tell them. So he's like giving him directions and how to know if he's alcoholic, getting connection, faith, and you know he referred to the Big Book as a guide, which no one really had done yet. But before those pamphlets came out, so in the Flying Blind period, 35 to 39-ish, those came out, but they're different parts of the country. But um, the word prospect and protege were used, and a protege is a person under the protection and care of another, right? And you see something, in a person, and you go, this guy's my protege. I'm gonna work with him here. Which is exactly what we do until they find God. And a prospect is the possibility that someone might do this. You know, it's the potential that a person is willing to change. And you can tell when they're not willing and they're willing. The book uses actually three terms to describe what we call a sponsee. I don't really like that term much, but it's prospect, protege, and friend. So from my own experience, when I see a new guy at a meeting or rehab or someone calls me, that's a prospect. They're reaching out, or if I just cross their path, I look at them as a prospect. And if I get that person into the first three steps, they're a protege because I'm taking him under his wing and I'm going to protege him to step four. But if I hear their fifth step, I believe that's when I have a friend. Um, it goes deep. I almost get emotional talking about it, but it's like that's what it goes very deep. You hear a fifth step, it's like, and the guy keeps doing it, especially if you start hearing their 10th step, you have a bond you'll never have with anyone else. And another old term was pigeon. And the legend has it, I mean, I'm going to say that now because a lot of things changed, but during Bill's tour of duty in France in World War I, Bill was in charge of raising carrier pigeons, which were used to carry messages across enemy lines. That information, would save, lots of lives. Um, sorry, phone's ringing. And Bill told Dr. Bob that story. He said, we need to come up with our own system of training a flock of new pigeons. And so they could go out and carry the message outward. And they wanted to maximize AA's growth. And what they created was something which now Wally P has taken and modernized it, called Back to Basics. I don't know what they called that then, but it was basically, you know, the sponsees were outnumbering the people, and the newcomers were outnumbering the guys who've been around for a while. So they had to sponsor people and take them to the steps in large groups, and like Dr. Bob, he sponsored tons of people. He was very serious, and he helped over 5,000 alcoholics in a 10-year period. 5,000. I used to look at that and think it was crazy. But my grand sponsor, he sponsored over 2,000 people because he would just go from rehab always all day long. You know, but why did Dr. Bob go to any lengths of sponsorship? Go to page 181. Let's see what Dr. Bob says about sponsorship. 181. And he says, I spend a great deal of time passing what I learned to others. I love that. What I learned to others who want and need it badly. There's two conditions right there. Want and need it. I do it for four reasons. This is right here. Want, a sense of duty. It is a pleasure. 3, because in doing so, I am paying off my debt to the man who took time to pass it on to me. 4, because every time I do it, I take out a little more insurance for myself against a possible slip. I just love the way he puts that. I love how he says a sense of duty, because it is a sense of duty. And then he just throws in there, it's a pleasure. I love that. And, Dr. Bob perfected, the one-on-one sponsorship before, before that was a couple, they would group a guy pretty much. And, Bill brought that, to New York. And Clarence Snyder really perfected it. So it's I'll be honest, 110%. I'm not a big on the term sponsorship or sponsee or sponsor. I use it because people know what I'm talking about. But when I hear the word, I think of fundraising or financial backer. We run, my wife and I run a fundraise nonprofit, so we have to fundraise a lot, and we have to get sponsors, and they're giving us money, right? So when I hear that word, I think of that a lot. And a person, organization that provides funds, it makes it sound like you're taking responsibility for another person, and then people think that. Also, nowhere in the big book does it say the word sponsor, and this is a big book study, and I'm a big book snob. The reason I use it here again is, people always ask that, well, why do you think you're saying it? Because, it's, and that as far as the word sponsee, it's not even a real word. I mean, now if you Google it, it will say in AA terms, and AI will say it, but in a regular old dictionary, you won't see the word. So if I describe what sponsorship is, I describe it as a spiritual mentor. And what a spiritual mentor, it's a spiritual relationship in which a more experienced person and more knowledgeable person helps advise and teaches and guides a less experienced and less knowledgeable person through spiritual principles to gain that same knowledge and experience. And so a spiritual mentor is a guide in the development of another person by using spiritual principles. So we can call it a step guide. The person under the mentorship is a mentee, and a mentee is guided by a more experienced person through a learning course, transmission of knowledge, growth, and deeper understanding using spiritual principles. And the goal of any mentor, no matter if it's in the business world or spiritual world, is to become a mentor of others. And I saw this quote before a while back: all mentors have mentors and still have one. One thing I found interesting in people always, they always want to know where are the principles amongst these principles. And I don't like to get in all those, but I do know that step 12 has principles. And I'm going to kind of go through these principles as slow as I can. But so with sponsoring, there are principles we experience, and one's the mentoring principle, to take another into your wing. 2 is a teaching principle, and that's to explain the steps to another person with your knowledge. And 3 is the growth principle. It's a byproduct of mentorship. There's the pillar principle. What's a pillar? It's a strong, holds something up, right? And the pillar is a person's a pillar is someone who we can always turn to. A sponsor is, the same. They, to support you as you're doing the work. There's the influence principle. What influence is to have an important effect on another person. It is an important way, of prompting them to, prompting motivation. We influence another by speaking from the heart, maybe even some tough love. To say just the right things to lift someone up. And also, our actions speak louder than words, right? And 6 is the empowerment principle. When we have empowerment within by doing the steps, we bring that to the inside out to the world, and people say that I want what he has. So there's an empowerment principle. Then the last one is the love principle. So that's a huge principle for sponsorship, is when we do the steps, we discover that love is all we are. And when we sponsor, we use our greatest characteristic that we now have, but we've always had, love. And love more, and it manifests. The only requirement to be a sponsor is to have a spiritual awakening. There's all these steps. The only requirement as a sponsor is taking on through the steps, as outlined in the book Alcoholics Anonymous. Nothing more, nothing less. So what does guiding a person through the steps consist of? This is a short one right here. So it's 10 things. 1, we explain to the person powerlessness. 2, thorough understanding of power. 3, proper execution of the 3rd step prayer with a prayer. With that prayer. 4, thorough explanation of step 4 before they write. We don't write it for them. 5, hearing all the person's 5th step, Not, I'm gonna hear 10 resentments and I know you. No, we're sitting there for as long as it takes, hearing all the person's fifth step. The sixth one is a proper explanation of step 6 and 7 with the prayer. 7 is assistance with writing their 8-step list, guidance of, proper execution of amends. 8 would be explanation of step 10, as well as hearing their continuous inventory and guiding them in the rest of 4 through 9. And 9, explanation of guidance in 11, maybe even helping them there with meditation. And the last one is telling them it's time to sponsor. My sponsor told me, I'm going to hear your fifth step. Right for the fifth step, he goes, oh, I'm going to hear this fifth step and all your crap, as long as you're going to make how good's your word. And I said, oh, it's great, which wasn't true. My word still wasn't. I didn't know what it was yet. And he just goes, well, if I hear this, you got to promise me you're going to do the same for someone else. And that's the longest promise I ever kept. Some of the things we might do as a sponsor, we might help them write their 4 steps if they can't read or write. I've had that happen before. I also sponsored a blind man before. Accompanying them on their amends. Some people don't want to, they get really scared. And this, my grant sponsor took me to make an amends. I thought he was going to the door with me. He just dropped me off and took off. But assisting them in their early stages of sponsoring, I called my sponsor, hey, which page is that again? Before I went and did it. And, and also I'm not a line by line, page by page guy. So I offer that after we had the spiritual awakening. I want to get them through as quickly as possible. This is my style. But when, you gotta remember, when this book came out in 39, this is very important. There were 2 Alcoholics Anonymouses. There's Alcoholics Anonymous, the book, and Alcoholics Anonymous, the fellowship. And there was no difference in the approach to recovery that they had. No difference at all. They mirrored each other. Today, Alcoholics Anonymous, the book is unchanged. The first 164 pages are left intact. I'm not talking about the modern language big book. That doesn't count. The Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous is quite different and no longer truly represents the solution contained in this book. Some meetings do, but a lot of them don't. And big book sponsors, place a greater emphasis upon the spiritual aspects of the program, of the program, a true big book sponsor will. Meetings are only desirable. That's what I was taught. But they speak in how God transformed their lives, so they stick to the sponsoring, how to do the steps as they are outlined in the book. And they don't, get into much else. They speak by doing the steps, you get a spiritual awakening. And these guys when they speak in a meeting, when they share, right away. And I believe in the fellowship, I like to call, there's what I call social recovery. And social recovery is joining a home group and getting involved in the fellowship. There's nothing wrong with that. I love meetings. Don't think I'm bashing meetings. And those groups, members share their feelings, and a lot of them don't focus on the steps. And they get more into group therapy and believe they're always recovering. In modern sponsorship, it's interesting because I was watching a Netflix movie with my wife, and this guy relapsed. He was sober and he starts drinking again. And he goes to AA for the first time. So he was trying to do it on his own. And he goes to AA and it's nothing. It's in a circle. I haven't been, I don't know where I live. I've never been to AA meeting. It's in a circle. But we're all like, theater seating type, at least here. And the guy goes to have a drink at his house, and the sponsor just opens his door, and he's like this big 6'8" guy. And that's the way Hollywood always produces, like a nonsense SOB, like a bodyguard. He takes the booze out of the guy's hand right in time. And he said something like, hey man, remember one day at a time, and left. And I was like, what the hell was that? But that description is not far off from a majority of you hear from, normies, but also the fellowship, you know? Ask someone in any meeting what a sponsor does. Let me back up a little bit. So when I was a counselor, I did what was called group process. The first group process we did was a big giant circle, and the first semester we're in the circle, and then the people are outside the circle, writing notes about us and stuff, and how well we're doing is group process too. And one week it came up what a sponsor was. And there's people in there that have been counselors for years getting their counseling license, had no idea, no clue at all. You know, like the sponsor's job is to keep the sponsee sober. Thank God it's not true. And the majority of those, people believe sponsorship has to do with taking responsibility for another person. And that's what I saw there. And I was only 3 years sober at the time, 2 years sober, and I was mystified. And over the years, I've created this sponsorship myth thing. And I'll give you quite a bit of them actually. And so one myth is you can't sponsor until you have 1 or 2 years. You hear that all the time. People say all the time, you can't sponsor, you get a year or 2 years. You can't sponsor if you have less than a month. I've known guys that have gone through the steps in 3 weeks, start sponsoring. And my guys don't go that quick, but you can't sponsor outside of meetings. You can't go to rehabs and stuff. That's not true. You can't sponsor a friend. It's not super recommended, but it's like my friend comes to me and says, "Man, you're the only person I trust." Guess what? Or you can't sponsor family members. I've taken family members to the steps, not immediate family members, but cousins and stuff. You can't sponsor the opposite sex. I don't know where the men's sponsor men and women sponsor women came from, but who sponsors the original women in the program? You I just can't turn down anybody. You can't sponsor someone unless they did the same drug, which I think is stupid. You can't sponsor and until you're ready. When a sponsor tells me, I don't know if I'm ready to sponsor yet, the only way you get ready is by doing it. So another one is you hear a lot of sponsor is, and I got this from like those counseling people. Oh, sponsor's a friend. It might happen, but it's not a goal. A sponsor's the answer man, support system, a broker, problem solver, panic button. That's the one I always hear. Panic button. Always right. Thank God that's not true because I'm wrong a lot. Perfect, superhuman, like a counselor. I've heard that before, like a therapist, a big brother, a dependence. A dependence. What about God? These sponsors will tell you to call me every day at 6 a.m. If you don't, you're fired. One of my guys I sponsor came to me and told me about that type of sponsorship he had, and the guy, every time he'd ask him, how much longer do I gotta call you every day? And the guy goes, well, since you asked, we're doing it again. But a sponsor must have lots of time. That's not true either. There's people that have tons of 30 years in this program, don't have a clue. I go to one meeting where the rehab that I do book studies at comes there a lot, and some of those guys know more about the steps than the people at the meetings do. But people think a sponsor must be old. You know, when I got sober, I was in young people's meetings, and we saw that it was 60 people this meeting, and we saw all the young people were sponsored by older men and women. And what we did was when we took over that business meeting, we decided you guys need to sponsor each other, and it started to take off. Sponsor must give us sponsee rides. I've seen, it's not a bad thing to do, but it's not a must. I've had sponsees call me up and just go, "Hey man, let's go to a meeting. I'm busy," and they get all mad, and they're not doing the steps yet. So I see that, a sponsor must help you cope with your problems. We have steps to do that. A sponsor must do what it takes to keep the sponsee sober. I don't need to question that at all. That's ridiculous. And you can't sponsor too many. I don't. Every time I raise my hand and say my plate's full, my plate gets empty all the time. So I never say it's, you know. And there's other ones. I'll just run through. You must call your sponsor every day at 6 a.m. Check in. Give back to the sponsor. There's a place out here, sponsorship line, where you go mow your sponsor's lawn and do yard work. I'm not kidding. It is weird. Well, I went to dinner with one of those guys once. He made me pay the bill. He made a sponsor pay the bill, not me, but a sponsor must call a sponsor when things go bad and talk about it. That's not how we do it. We do this. We do the inventory. You know, we have the same beliefs, go to the same meetings, and all that stuff. So some will tell you sponsoring and counseling are the same thing. It's oil and water, not related. Being a counselor is what I did for a long time, and it's a paid job in the recovery field. My job was to teach patients using therapeutic presentation of remedies and tools, even if I didn't agree with them. And in fact, to educate alcoholics about behavior patterns and stuff. It's called treatment. Very different from sponsorship. Lots of newcomers will say, I'm going to, they'll become a counselor and they say, I don't need a sponsor because now I'm a professional counselor. It's not, it's a counselor is not a professional sponsor. And it was hard work for me to do it. And some sponsors want to give relationship advice, tell the sponsees who to date, when they should break up, get a divorce, and all this stuff. I'm a person that failed at a lot of relationships in the past. I'm not going to tell you how to have one. And we're asked to turn one life over to the care of God, not anyone else, not our sponsor. I don't want to run someone else's lives. I don't want to, I don't want to run my life anymore. Why would I want to run someone else's? And it's this all classic modern recovery stuff that people believe, where you get too caught up in being a big brother or a dictator. That just makes us more fear, codependent. And if you're not going to drink, call your sponsor. You hear that all the time. I'm sorry, if you're going to drink, call your sponsor. I meant to say, not going to drink. So a sponsor's job is not to keep the sponsee sober. The steps, they're put so secondary. It's sad. And it's like the recovery is replaced with personal advice and rules to follow. And where does that say in the book where it's supposed to be dependent on other people? I always tell people I work with, I'm going to take you through the steps, but don't call my number anymore. Call this number once you find God. 1-800-GOD. I always joke with that. The, that type of sponsor. The reason I bring it up, and I know it sounds long-winded, all that stuff, but it's very dangerous to a real alcoholic who desperately needs this solution. I was taught, early on that if it's not in the book, don't suggest it. If it's not in the book, the message is watered down, diluted. And so many sponsors often think, they're this genius saving the sponsor's life and they have all the answers, never wrong, leaving out the sponsor's primary job with newcomers, take them through the steps. There's nothing on this planet like taking people through the steps. You get to, think about it, you get to witness someone, as the book says, survive and rediscover life. It's incredible. I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. I mean, to watch a person's eyes light up when you just tell them about the allergy and they never heard before. To see their eyes light up when they realize that this great reality is within them, or when after they discover it, or they change right in front of you during the fifth step, right in front of your eyes, they change, or that new glow they get after 6 and 7, or that bounce they get, and they made amends, and they're going to tell you anyways, but you just know it. But to witness the joy from helping the person, I love and it's not an ego thing, when I walk into the room and my sponsee will kind of be pointing the guy out in the book and stuff, and you're like, wow, that guy was broken a while back, and the rediscovering life is so beautiful. I mean, I wouldn't, like I said, I wouldn't trade for anything in the world. And when you're doing this service, you don't have to ask or push to do it. It pulls you in. And no matter how bad you feel, how much pain you're in, like I mentioned, what circumstances are in your life, what's weighing you down, what grief you're dealing with, selfless service is the best medicine, and I look at, the altruistic realm, all I know is there's no greed, it's service. There's no hate because it's love. I mean, there's no lies because there's honesty. And there's no resentments because there's such compassion. And without worry, there's only peace. And you get humility instead of pride, and joy instead of misery, faith instead of doubt. And most of all, freedom. It's all about hope, and we cannot change the way another thinks or what they choose to do, but we can always do our part. And we can offer them what's freely given to us, even if they refuse it, even if they don't want it, even if they don't want to follow it, even if they say thanks for the information afterwards, even if they say I'm going to do it on my own, even if they turn away your hand, we always get paid spiritually. And my grandsponsor used to always say, with sponsoring, you get paid spiritually, but if you don't sponsor, you paid the price. And, I mean, see, here's the thing is heroes are not made, you know, they're not necessarily wear capes and all this stuff. They're a selfless person who finds their way giving themselves freely, helping others. Exactly, what someone gave to them. I'm gonna close with this story. Some of you heard before. It's called The Man in the Hole. And so this guy's walking into this field and he's all depressed. And he's walking this field and he falls in the hole. It's about, let's just say it's 17 feet down. Hits the ground pretty hard in there. So he's hurt. And he's like, hey, anyone help? For like a few days. And this guy's a drunk and, whatever. He's like, help. And finally, the doctor shows up. And he goes, hey, man, can you get me out of this hole? And he goes, I don't know about that, but take these. And he throws him some pills. And he takes the pills and he feels better. His predicament's different, but then he realizes when it wears off, he's in a hole. And he starts really getting desperate and really worried he's not gonna get out of this hole. And the therapist shows up and he goes, what's wrong, son? And he's all, well, he goes, hold on. He puts a chair next to the hole. And he goes, tell me everything about yourself. And when a guy gets really into it, therapist goes, oh, sorry, the hour's up. He runs away. He's still stuck in the hole. Then he gets so desperate, he starts praying to God. And a pastor shows up. And the pastor says, what's wrong, son? He goes, let's pray. And they pray. And he throws him a Bible. Pastor takes off. He's reading the Bible for a few days. And he looks up, oh my God, I'm still in the hole. And he throws the Bible out. And then all of a sudden, the shadowy figure shows up out of the darkness. And he goes, who are you? And he goes, I've been listening to your cries and your whining and all your stuff. And he jumps into the hole with the guy. He actually goes, you want to get out? The guy goes, yeah. And he jumps into the hole with him. He goes, are you crazy? And he goes, we're both stuck in the hole. He goes, relax, son. I know the way out. So next week, we're going to talk about carrying the message more. And we're going to have to go from the beginning of the book and hit little sponsorship points. So it's going to be a few weeks. So I'm going to stop the recording.